compassion, you see things very differently, you speak differently. The other person can sense you are truly seeing her and understanding her, and that already eases her pain significantly. Even a child can look deeply and see that his parents have difficulties and don't know how to handle their own pain. Their suffering overflows out onto the people around them, including even especially the ones they love. An understanding of suffering helps anger to be transformed, and when compassion is born in your heart, you naturally want to reach out to help others suffer less. Understanding and compassion are not for somebody else to cultivate. They can heal you and increase your happiness. A human being without understanding and compassion isn't a happy being. Without compassion and understanding, you are utterly alone and cut off. You can't relate to any other human being. I wouldn't want to be in a world without any suffering, because then there would be no compassion and understanding either. If you haven't suffered hunger, you can't appreciate having something to eat. If you haven't gone through a war, you don't know the value of peace. That is why we should not try to run away from one unpleasant thing after another, holding our suffering, looking deeply into it, and transforming it into compassion. We find a way to happiness. With mindfulness, the feelings that have been painful and difficult transform into something beautiful, the wondrous, healing balm of understanding and compassion. Easing communication. Our most basic difficulty is that sometimes we lack good communication inside ourselves. We don't understand ourselves. In our body, there are conflicts and tensions, and we can't resolve them. Instead of stopping and looking deeply, we are running as far away as possible from the loneliness, grief, sadness, anger, and emptiness that we feel we can't bear. If we're in this situation and we find ourselves unable to communicate well with others, that's normal. They aren't communicating with themselves, and we aren't communicating with ourselves. So is it any wonder we have difficulty communicating with each other? The situation doesn't call for blame or punishment. It calls for understanding and compassion. With the practice of mindfulness, starting with our mindful breathing, we recognize that suffering is there in us, and suffering is also there in the other person. We ourselves need help. The other person also needs help. Nobody needs punishment. So, when you get angry and you suffer, don't try to say or do something to punish the other person, because there is a lot of suffering in her already, and punishing her won't improve the situation at all. The most effective way to show compassion to another is to listen rather than talk. You have an opportunity to practice deep, compassionate listening. If you can listen to the other person with compassion, your listening is like a salve for her wound. In the practice of compassionate listening, you listen with only one purpose, which is to give the other person the chance to speak out and to suffer less. This practice requires steady concentration and mindful breathing in and out to refrain from interrupting or attempting to correct what you hear. While the other person speaks, you may hear a lot of bitterness, wrong perception, and accusation in her speech. If you allow these things to touch off the anger in you, you'll lose your capacity to listen deeply. Instead, hold on to your true purpose and remind yourself, listening like this, my sole aim is to help the other person to suffer less. She may be full of wrong perceptions, but I won't interrupt her. If I jump in with my perspective on things or correct her, it will become a debate, not a practice of deep listening. Another time, there may be a chance for me to offer her a little information so that she can correct her wrong perception, but not now. That kind of mindfulness helps you to keep your compassion alive and protects you from having the seed of anger in you touched off. Who knows, you may be the first one who has listened deeply to her like that. When you have understood her suffering and you are ready to speak, your voice will contain compassion. You can use loving speech, free of judgment or blame. You might say something such as, "It's not my intention to make you suffer. I didn't understand your suffering. I'm sorry." Please help me by telling me about your struggles and your difficulties. I need help in understanding you. Or you may be able to say, I know you have suffered a lot during the past many years. I was not able to help you to suffer less. Instead, I have made the situation worse. I have reacted with anger and stubbornness, and instead of helping you, I have made you suffer more. I am very sorry. Many of us are no longer able to use that kind of language with the other person because we have suffered so much. But when we consciously practice deep listening and loving speech, so much healing and happiness is possible. Mình uống nước ra mọi người. Being a mindfulness bell for a loved one. If you have a loved one who suffers, you can be a compassionate ally for him. You can offer to sit with him when he has to have a difficult conversation with somebody, either in person or over the phone. Every time the person he's speaking with says something that you think might trigger your loved one's anger or sadness, you can squeeze your loved one's hand. That is your bell of mindfulness. Say to your loved one ahead of time, when you feel that squeeze, remember you don't have to say anything. Take it as a reminder to breathe in and out 3 times slowly, paying attention to your breath. Try to smile. Maybe the person you are talking with will be very surprised by your quality of listening. Just breathe in and out 3 times. Don't say anything and try to smile. Play the role of a bell of mindfulness. Your squeezing the hand is like a bell, lovingly calling your friend to come back to himself. That squeeze means, I am here for you. You don't need to do anything but breathe. Mình đang đọc cuốn Low Mất No Lotus nha mọi người. Các bạn nhớ thả tim giúp mình nhé. Cảm ơn mọi người rất nhiều. Hôm nay mình sẽ đọc khá là lâu. Nếu mà được mọi người ủng hộ, mọi người nhớ thả tim giúp mình nha. Mình cố gắng đọc chậm rồi bạn ạ. Và mình sẽ không đọc chậm hơn nữa nha. Nếu mà mình đọc chậm hơn nữa thì nó quá là chậm ấy. Thế là mình sẽ chỉ đọc tốc độ như thế này thôi. Tiếp theo chương số 4, Ease. Some of the situations and accidents that causes the greatest suffering, when seen objectively, do not look very big, but because we don't know how to manage them, they feel enormous. If we lose a loved one, that is, of course, a major loss. There is real pain there, and we feel it mightily, but we also can spend days worrying that someone doesn't like us, or that we didn't say or do the right thing, or that we won't get the promotion we want. These are small sufferings, relatively speaking, but we magnify them until they seem to take up all our mind space. If we know how to handle the little sufferings, we don't have to suffer on a daily basis. We can practice letting go of what the French call something little miseries, and save our energy to embrace and soothe the true pains of illness and loss that are unavoidable. Releasing the arrow. There is a Buddhist teaching found in the Silatha Sutta known as the arrow. It says if an arrow hits you, you will feel pain in that part of your body where the arrow hit. And then, if a second arrow comes and strikes exactly at the same spot, the pain will not be only double, it will become at least 10 times more intense. The unwelcome things that sometimes happen in life, being rejected, losing a valuable object, failing a test, getting injured in an accident, are analogous to the first arrow. Oh, new word. They may cause some pain. The second arrow, fired by our own selves, is our reaction, our storyline, and our anxiety. All these things magnify the suffering. Many times, the ultimate disaster we're ruminating upon hasn't even happened. We may worry, for example, that we have a cancer and that we are going to die soon. We don't know, and our fear of the unknown makes the pain grow even bigger. The second arrow may take the form of judgment. How could I have been so stupid? Fear, what if the pain doesn't go away? Or anger, I hate that I'm in pain. I don't deserve this. We can quickly conjure up a hell realm of negativity in our minds that multiplies the stress of the actual event by 10 times or even more. Part of the art of suffering well is learning not to magnify our pain by getting carried away in fear, anger, and despair. We build and maintain our energy reserves to handle the big sufferings, the little sufferings we can let go. If you lose your job, of course, it's a normal response to feel fear and anxiety. It is true that in most cases to be out of work is a suffering, and there is real danger attached if you don't have enough to eat or can't afford necessary medicine. But you don't need to make this suffering worse by spinning stories in your head that are much worse than the reality. Some people in this situation may think, I'm no good at this or that, or I'll never get another job, or I failed my family. It's important to remember that everything is impermanent. A suffering can arise or can work itself out for anyone at any moment. Instead of throwing good energy away from condemning yourself or obsessing over what catastrophes may be lurking around the corner, you can simply be present with the real suffering that is right in front of you, with what is happening right now. Mindfulness is recognizing what is there in the present moment. Suffering is there, yes, but what is also there is that you are still alive. Breathing in, I know I'm alive. Your eyes still work. Breathing in, I'm aware of my eyes. Breathing out, I smile to my eyes. To have eyes in good condition is a wonderful thing because you have eyes in good condition. There's a paradise of shapes and colors available to you at every moment. There are those among us who have gone blind. They've lost that endlessly changing kaleidoscope of shapes and colors, and what they want more than anything is to have that faculty back again. You only need to open your eyes to be in touch with that kaleidoscope. It's a paradise if you only stop to notice and appreciate it. If you have eyes in good condition, just open them and enjoy what you see. Happiness is possible immediately, even if not everything is perfect. When you look at the person you love, if he or she is absorbed in anxiety, you can help that person to get out. Darling, do you see the sunset? Do you see the spring coming? This is mindfulness. Mindfulness is for making us aware of what is happening now. Not only are there always conditions of happiness present in me, but they are also all around me. Cảm ơn mọi người rất nhiều. Các bạn nhớ thả tim giúp mình với nhé. Thả tim và có thể thả comment giúp mình với nha. Thank you so much. Mình đang đọc cuốn sách No Mud, No Lotus của thầy Thích Nhất Hạnh. Complexes and the sense of a separate self. Most of the second errors with which we shoot ourselves come from our beliefs. One basic problem that causes us to suffer is the idea that we are a separate self. This gives rise to the complexes of inferiority, superiority, and equality. As long as we have the idea of a self, we try to protect this self by running away from all kinds of threats and discomforts. If there is some loneliness, some anger, or some fear, we don't like it and we try to pretend that the suffering is not there. It's nothing, we say, nervously trying to sweep all the feelings under the rug. We create unnecessary pain when our reaction to an unpleasant event is to compare ourselves with other selves, reinforcing our illusion of separateness. We may feel a fleeting satisfaction when we tell ourselves, I am better than he is. I don't care what he says. That's the complex of superiority. Or we may try to immunize ourselves from disappointment by thinking, I'll never be as good as she is. There's no point in trying. That's the complex of inferiority. Most people think the best way to deal with these complexes is to maintain the belief, I am their equal. But that is also a complex invented by the comparing mind. equality when it refers to opportunity and access to resources. In other words, treating everyone's needs and feelings with respect is a good thing. But the constant effort to prove oneself equal to all others brings only short-lived relief from the pain of discrimination and ultimately creates more suffering because it perpetuates our incorrect belief in a separate self. If we think, I claim the right to be as good as he is, there is still the idea of a separate self, and therefore there will always be comparison. As long as you continue to compare, you suffer from the fear of coming up short, and even worse, you keep yourself trapped in a constant, painful delusion of isolation and alienation. Greener Grass, the story of the Buddha and Mara. Lại uống nước. Cảm thấy chỉ khát nước mà hôm nay mình khát nước nhiều ấy. Tiếp nha, đọc tiếp nè. Các bạn nhớ thả tim giúp mình nhé. Cảm ơn mọi người. This story about the Buddha meeting Mara illustrates a problem with complexes. In Buddhist stories, Mara is the personification of all depravity and delusion, everything that makes us suffer in life. The Buddha was taking a solid retreat in a cave. His attendant and student, the Venerable Ananda, would go out begging for alms, and upon returning would divide his offerings into two, one part for him and one for the Buddha. One morning, as the Buddha was sitting inside the cave in meditation, Venerable Ananda, sitting outside the cave, saw someone approaching. Ananda had an inkling that this was someone very familiar. It was Mara. Ananda wanted to hide somewhere so that Mara, not seeing anyone, would not approach the cave and disturb the Buddha. But it was too late. Mara walked up to Ananda and asked, Venerable Ananda, is your teacher here? Ananda wanted to lie and say, no, the Buddha is not here. The Buddha went to some kind of meeting, conference or something. But lying is not appropriate for a monk. So he finally said, why do you ask? Mary said, I want to visit the Buddha. Ananda responded rather scornfully, go away, you're not a friend of the Buddha. You are his enemy. Don't you remember how you tried to discourage the Buddha from awakening under the Bodhi tree? And the Buddha defeated you terribly. The Buddha won't see you. When Mara heard that, he laughed. Ha ha ha. Really? The Buddha has enemies? I thought he said he doesn't have any enemies. Why is it that he has an enemy now? Ananda was dumbstruck. So he went into the cave to ask the Buddha if he wanted to see Mara. Ananda was hoping the Buddha would refuse, but when he heard who was waiting outside, the Buddha said, Mara, let him in. Ananda was really disappointed, but he was obliged to go out and let Mara in. When Mara entered, the Buddha stood up and welcomed Mara as if he were an old friend. He invited Mara to sit down in a distinguished place and asked Ananda to bring tea and water for Mara to drink. Ananda was really unhappy about it. He would be happy to get tea for the Buddha 200 times a day, but for Mara, Ananda didn't want to do it at all. Ananda didn't want to do it at all, but he went and got tea for Mara, hoping that Buddha and Mara would have a short conversation. In fact, the conversation ended up being very long. Buddha and Mara spoke as if they were the best of friends. Buddha said, Mara, how has it been for you? How are you doing? Mara said, not very well. What happened? The Buddha asked. Mara answered, My disciples aren't listening to me anymore. They used to do everything I told them to, but nowadays they want to rebel. All my generals, all my soldiers, all my disciples, they want to practice mindfulness. They want to practice walking meditation. They want to practice eating in silence. They want to protect the earth. I don't know who got to them. Dear Buddha, I'm just so tired of being Mara. I want to be someone else. Don't think that being Mara is all wild parties, fun, and games. The Buddha laughed. You think being a Buddha is such a lark? Do you know that people say things that I have never said, and then they say it is I who said that? They do things that I have never done or encouraged them to do, but they say that I encouraged them to do those things. I let go of my exalted reputation, my princely position, and an endless availability of sensual pleasures. I abandoned my throne, my beautiful wife and baby, future children, and wealth, all so that I could realize liberation. But now people come to the temple to pray and plead with me to give them all the very things I have renounced. They don't ask for peace or joy, they just ask for lots of money, power, or for their children to have good grades on their exams. They build a big house and they say it's my house, but it's only a place where people come to pass by and offer food, bananas, sweet rice, and money so that they can have more money to spend on themselves. They make statues of me and they stick all their money on my body. When they celebrate my birthday, they put my statue up on top of a car and they drive mindlessly through the city while my body rocks from side to side. I didn't even want to be riding on a car, so I don't think that being Buddha is lucky. Do you want to exchange places? Ananda was terrified that Mara would agree, but luckily he didn't. Then the Buddha said, Mara, you do your job. Do your job the best you can. I do my job. Nothing is easy all the time. I know being Mara is very difficult, but being a Buddha has its difficulties too. Each one of us has to play our part wholeheartedly. Every life has its trials and tribulations. We can navigate them more skillfully when we don't waste time and energy shooting ourselves with a second arrow, such as dwelling on how much greener the grass in our neighbor's yard looks compared to ours. Hay gì? Ở đây đó có một cái chỗ nói là khi mà mình bị bắn một mũi tên á, cái này trước mình xem mấy bài của thầy Minh Niệm thầy cũng có nói, khi mình bị bắn một mũi tên vào ngực đi hay là vào vai đi thì nó chỉ đau một thôi, nhưng mà khi mình nhận thêm một cái mũi tên số 2 nữa vào đúng cái chỗ đấy á, thì nó phải đau lên gấp 10 lần, gấp 100 lần nữa. Và thực ra đây là một cái câu chuyện người ta dùng hình ảnh kiểu metaphor ấy, ẩn dụ ấy. Cái mũi tên đầu tiên ấy nó sẽ là một cái suffering gì đó trong cuộc đời của mình, thì nó có thể là một cái sự kiện gì đấy, một cái biến cố gì đấy cuộc đời chẳng hạn, ví dụ bạn mất việc hay là bạn chia tay với người yêu hay là sao đó. Nhưng mà cái mũi tên số 2 ấy là cái reaction của bạn. Nếu mà khi bạn đặt vào cái sự kiện đó một cái reaction tiêu cực, bạn biến bản thân mình một victim, một nạn nhân ấy, thì cái mũi tên số 2 đấy nó sẽ làm cho mình đau đớn gấp nhiều lần cái sự kiện đó. Tức là cái sự kiện nó chỉ là một sự kiện thôi. Nếu mình không bỏ vào bất kỳ cái trạng thái tiêu cực nào ấy, hay là những cái suy nghĩ tiêu cực. Hay quá. Ok, mình nghỉ tí, nghỉ 2 phút nha mọi người ơi. Đây ạ. Cuốn No Mud No Lotus nha mọi người. Cái quyển này nó hơi kiểu bóng bóng, nhìn ngoài đẹp lắm, mà trên livestream nhìn nó hơi đây, tên sách đây. Mình sinh năm 98 bạn ạ. Cảm ơn mọi người, các bạn nhớ follow mình nhé. Các bạn đang nghe ở đây, các bạn nhớ follow mình nhá. Mình nghỉ một chút. Cái quyển này mình đọc rất là nhanh ý. Hôm qua hình như chị không live nhỉ? Hôm qua chị có live đấy các bạn. Ok, mình đọc tiếp nha. Tiếp này, chương số 5. 5 practices for nurturing happiness. We don't have to wait for the end of all suffering before we can be happy. Happiness is available to us right here and right now, but we may need to change our idea of happiness. Our idea of happiness may itself be the main obstacle keeping us from true happiness. There are oysters living in the depths of the sea, and they don't have any eyes. They have never seen the blue sky or the stars. We have eyes. We can see the beautiful sky above us, but we often don't appreciate what we have. Most of the time, we just ignore it. There are more conditions of happiness available than you and I can count, many more than it takes to make us happy in the here and the now. If you are able to read a book, to read and understand these words, you are already much luckier than many people. The difference between joy and happiness. We can experience both joy and happiness, but Buddhist teachings do make a distinction between the two. In joy, there is still some element of excitement. Think of a person walking in the desert who has run out of drinking water. If suddenly that person sees that there is an oasis ahead, trees with beautiful shade and a lake of fresh water, he will feel joy. When he arrives at the lake and actually cups the water and drinks, this is happiness. You can experience both. The method here is simple. Breathing in, bring your mind home to your body. Establish yourself in the here and the now and recognize what is around you. Then joy and happiness arise easily from your recognition of all the positive elements available right now. Why the Buddha kept meditating. When I was a young monk, I wondered why the Buddha kept practicing mindfulness and meditation even after he had already become a Buddha. Now I find the answer is plain enough to see. Happiness is impermanent, like everything else. In order for happiness to be extended and renewed, you have to learn how to feed your happiness. Nothing can survive without food, including happiness. Your happiness can die if you don't know how to nourish it. If you cut a flower but you don't put it in some water, the flower will wilt in a few hours, even if happiness is already manifesting. We have to continue to nourish it. This is sometimes called conditioning, and it's very important. We can condition our bodies and minds to happiness with the 5 practices of letting go, inviting positive seeds, mindfulness, concentration, and insight. The first practice, letting go. The first method of creating joy and happiness is to cast off, to leave behind. There is a kind of joy that comes from letting go. Many of us are bound to so many things. We believe these things are necessary for our survival, our security, and our happiness. But many of these things, or more precisely our beliefs about their outer necessity, are real obstacles for our joy and happiness. Sometimes you think that having a certain career, diploma, salary, house, or partner is crucial for your happiness. You think you can't go on without it. Even when you have achieved that situation or are with that person, you continue to suffer. At the same time, you are still afraid that if you let go of that prize you've attained, it will be even worse. You will be even more miserable without the object you are clinging to. You can't live with it, and you can't live without it. If you come to look deeply in your fearful attachment, you will realize that it is in fact the very obstacle to your joy and happiness. You have the capacity to let it go. Letting go takes a lot of courage sometimes, but once you let go, happiness comes very quickly. You won't have to go around searching for it. Imagine you're a city dweller taking a weekend trip out to the countryside. If you live in a big metropolis, there's a lot of noise, dust, pollution, and odors, but also a lot of opportunities and excitement. One day, a friend coaxes you into getting away for a couple of days. At first, you may say, I can't. I have so much work. I might miss an important call. But finally, he convinces you to leave, and an hour or two later, you find yourself in the countryside. You see open space, you see the sky, and you feel the breeze on your cheeks. Happiness is born from the fact that you could leave the city behind. If you hadn't left, How could you experience that kind of joy? You needed to let go. Releasing your cows. One day, the Buddha was sitting with some of his monks in the woods. They had just come back from an alms round and were ready to share a mindful lunch together. A farmer passed by looking distraught. Chuyện này nghe vẻ quen thì trước mình cũng nghe rồi thì phải. He asked the Buddha, "Monks, have you seen some cows going by here?" "What cows?" The Buddha responded. "Well," the man said, "I have 4 cows and I don't know why, but this morning they all ran away. I also have 2 acres of sesame. This year the insects ate the entire crop. I have lost everything, my harvest and my cows. I feel like killing myself." The Buddha said, "Dear friend, we have been sitting here almost an hour and we have not seen any cows passing by. Maybe you should go and look in the other direction." When the farmer was gone, the Buddha looked at his friends and smiled knowingly. "Dear friends, you are very lucky," he said. "You don't have any cows to lose." I knew a rich woman living in New York City who purchased a piece of land adjacent to her building. She wanted to build a huge apartment complex on the land and then sell it so she could make a lot of money. A friend came to visit her and stood looking out the window. It had a beautiful view of the George Washington Bridge and a lot of blue sky. The friend turned to the woman who had bought the land and said, "Don't build the apartment complex. If you do, you won't have this beautiful view anymore. Your neighbors won't have a view anymore. You'll no longer see the blue sky and the river. You only need to stand here and look, and already you can have happiness. What is the use of having more money and losing all that beauty and happiness?" The woman was able to hear this and changed her plans for the building, releasing 1 big cow thanks to the wise counsel of a friend. One of the biggest cows that we have is our narrow idea of happiness. You may suffer just because of your idea, and you continue to suffer until one day you are capable of releasing the idea and right away you feel happy. A whole country can be caught in a single cow. A nation of hundreds of millions may believe that such and such ideology is crucial for the country to become a big power in the world, and that superpower status is essential to the people's happiness. So they invest everything in that ideology and insist it is the best way, the only way. Countries can hold on to their cows for hundreds of years